The MH-47. Chinook sliced through the blinding snowstorm like a hawk with a broken wing, its massive twin rotors whipping the falling flakes into horizontal sheets of absolute white. Down in the belly of the birds, 12 of us from SEAL Team 7 sat in a heavy, practiced silence. Our faces were completely obscured behind tactical balaclavas and the cold steel of night vision mounts. I glanced down at the temperature gauge on my rig. It read 0 degrees Fahrenheit, but with the brutal wind chill roaring outside, it felt way closer to 30 below. As the commander of this circus, I pressed my thick, gloved finger against our digital tactical display, tracing our planned insertion point for the 100th time. The mission parameters handed down from the top brass were straightforward enough. Get into a Taliban-controlled compound nestled deep in the Hindu Kush mountains, and pull out an American diplomat named Richard Harmon. The initial intelligence packet we'd been handed promised somewhere between 15 and 20 hostiles on site. Our thermal imaging, however, was currently telling a completely different story. "Boss, I'm picking up at least 40 distinct heat signatures down there," Lieutenant Chen reported, his voice cutting through the static of our internal comms. "This doesn't match the brief we pulled at all." My jaw tightened under my mask. Just 24 hours ago, back on Christmas Eve, word had come down the pipe that the enemy had moved Harmon from Kabul to this freezing, middle-of-nowhere outpost. We knew our window to get him back was slamming shut by the minute. If we didn't move now, the Taliban would shift him again by tomorrow morning, likely pushing him across the Pakistani border where we couldn't legally follow. Just then, the crew chief flashed us the 2-minute warning. I stood up to give my guys the final rundown, but as I turned around, my eyes snagged on the very back of the cargo bay. Sitting right there, practically swallowed whole by tactical gear that looked twice her size, was a kid who looked like she belonged anywhere else but here. Ava Reyes looked like she should be at a library studying for a high school math quiz, not gearing up to provide high-stakes overwatch for the most lethal fighting force on the planet. She was only 15 years old and barely scraped 5'3". Her dark hair was yanked back into a fierce, tight braid, tucked beneath a standard-issue watch cap. The massive TAC-338 sniper rifle resting across her knees was nearly as long as she was tall. "Listen up," I called out over the roar of the engines. "We've got long-range support covering our backsides for this op. This is Ava Reyes, on loan to us from Langley. She's going to be setting up on the high ground to provide precision fire." The reaction from the line was instant. A wave of snickers and muffled chuckles rippled right through my squad. Petty Officer Jackson leaned over toward his buddy, not even trying to hide it. "Are you kidding me? She's 15. Did someone bring their kid to work today and get lost?" More guys started laughing. Ava didn't even blink. Honestly, she'd already heard much worse during her 6-month stint at the agency's training grounds out in Virginia. Her hands just kept moving methodically over her rifle's optic, twisting the dials to adjust for the brutal altitude and the screaming winds we were about to jump into. The weapon she carried was chambered in .338 Lapua Magnum, a beast capable of dropping a target from well over 1,500 yards out in the right hands. "Boss, the visibility out there is going to be 60 feet at best," Petty Officer Rodriguez muttered under his breath. "What's a kid going to spot through this soup that our thermals can't?" I raised a hand to shut them up, even though I was secretly riding the exact same wave of skepticism. The orders to bring her along had come from so far up the food chain that arguing wasn't even an option. Her official asset designation was Sierra 7, and her file listed her specialty as extreme long-range precision fire in catastrophic weather. The paperwork just conveniently forgot to mention she wasn't old enough to vote. The Chinook gave a massive lurch as we dropped down through the final 1,000 feet of our descent. Ava did a final gear check, running her hands over her rangefinder, wine meter, ballistic computer, and a tiny, scratched hand mirror she kept tucked safely into her top vest pocket. The mirror was dinged up and bent at one corner, a clear relic from a different life. 30 seconds, the crew chief roared. My guys stood up in unison, locking and loading their weapons. Ava was the last one to rise, her heavy rifle slung across her back, in a custom harness designed to distribute the weight across her slight shoulders. She stepped up to the edge of the ramp, where nothing but whiteout conditions and pitch blackness waited for us. Before we stepped out into the freeze, I grabbed her shoulder, forcing her to look at me. "You stay behind us. You do not pull that trigger unless I give you the explicit green light. Do you copy?" Ava locked her eyes onto mine. "Understood, sir." There was a look in her eyes that threw me off for a second. It wasn't standard teenage defiance. It was a cold, quiet certainty. It was the gaze of someone who had already looked straight into the worst parts of the world. The ramp dropped open, and the squad poured out into the blinding white storm, our boots sinking deep into 3 feet of fresh powder that completely buried an old, abandoned Soviet-era military base. The Chinook's turbine screamed as it pulled pitch and vanished into the gray, leaving us in a sudden, heavy silence. I flashed the hand signal for our staggered formation. Our target was a compound about 200 yards to the northeast, right up against a sheer rock face. According to the bird's-eye satellite photos, the main objective was a half-crumbled 3-story concrete structure surrounded by a chaotic web of small outbuildings. Ava trailed about 20 paces behind the main stack, her eyes constantly scanning the landscape for a decent vantage point. The tree line off to the west had potential, but the shooting angles were all wrong. She needed serious elevation and a clear line of sight. Movement. 11 o'clock, Chen whispered over the net. The entire team froze instantly. Through the thick curtain of falling snow, we could see dark shapes shifting near the rusted-out skeleton of an old military truck. There were way too many of them. "I've got 6 hostiles in view, maybe a hell of a lot more stacked up right behind them," Rodriguez reported, his voice tense. Ava's hand dropped seamlessly to her rangefinder. They were roughly 800 yards out. The wind was ripping out of the northwest at around 10 miles per hour, with sudden gusts hitting closer to 15. She started running the ballistic drop equations in her head, a brutal mental math her dad had drilled into her through thousands of hours of practice. "Commander," she whispered into her mic, "requesting permission to break off and establish an overwatch position." "Negative, Sierra 7, I shot back immediately. "Hold your current position." But those dark shapes ahead of us were multiplying fast. What started as 6 quickly turned to 12, then 20. Our thermal optics started painting the white landscape in angry shades of orange and red. "This is a setup," Jackson growled into his comms. "We're walking straight into a meat grinder." He was absolutely right, Ava realized as she watched the heat signatures bloom. The compound wasn't a holding cell for a prisoner. It was a perfectly constructed kill zone. 3 years ago, back when Ava was just 12, her dad had handed her that little scratched mirror as a Christmas gift. It wasn't so she could check her hair. It was a tool for staying alive. Master Sergeant David Reyes had been an absolute legend within Delta Force, a master sniper instructor who had spent decades shaping 2 generations of elite operators. His bread and butter was teaching the kind of dirty, unconventional shooting tricks that kept you breathing when the high-tech gear fried and everything went to hell. "A simple mirror can keep you above dirt, kiddo," he'd told her that snowy morning at their place near Fort Liberty, North Carolina. "It lets you peek around blind corners, signal a bird overhead, and best of all, it can completely trick an enemy counter-sniper. You flash it right, they think they've spotted the glint of your scope, but you're actually sitting pretty 3 feet to the left." Ava had basically grown up on military bases, homeschooled in the quiet spaces between her dad's overseas deployments. While other kids her age were memorizing multiplication tables, she was calculating mil-dot holdovers. While they played video games, she was out in the dirt, adjusting for windage and air density. It wasn't a cruel childhood. David Reyes loved his little girl with everything he had. But after her mom was killed in a head-on collision when Ava was only 7, he had funneled all his raw grief into making sure his daughter was ready for a brutal world. He taught her how to shoot, how to think, and how to survive. The raw talent was just in her blood. Ava's vision clocked in at a staggering 20/8, meaning she could clearly see from 20 feet away what a normal person needed to be 8 feet from to decipher. Her hand-eye coordination was literally off the charts. But beyond the raw physics, she had this almost creepy, instinctual ability to read the atmosphere, to actually feel the tiny drops in barometric pressure that would drag a bullet off the course. By 13, she was hitting steel targets at 800 yards without breaking a sweat. By 14, she pushed that out to 1,200. That's when the folks at Langley started taking notes. Then came the previous Christmas, December 23rd to be exact. Ava Reyes was providing high-angle overwatch for a hostage rescue mission down in Yemen. It was supposed to be a standard smash and grab to pull out an American aid worker from an Al-Qaeda cell, but the operational security had leaked. The team on the ground walked straight into a massive, coordinated ambush. David held his nest for 40 long minutes, pouring down suppressing fire so the team could fall back under heavy contact. He single-handedly saved 11 lives that morning. The 12th shot fired in that valley, the one meant for him, came from an enemy sniper he never saw through the smoke. The CIA officer who showed up on Ava's doorstep didn't sugarcoat a damn thing. "Your old man died doing what he did best," he told her, "protecting his people." Then, they made her an offer. The agency needed someone with her exact, terrifying skill set. They wanted a ghost, someone who could drop into sensitive areas where a massive military sniper would trigger an international incident. Someone everyone would overlook and underestimate. "You can honor what he stood for," the suit had told her, "or you can let his sacrifice mean nothing." Ava chose to honor him. 6 months of brutal, isolated training followed. They didn't waste time on basic marksmanship. She already had that down to a science. Instead, they drilled her on tradecraft, advanced radio communications, and tactical analysis. The shrinks at headquarters worried constantly about her age, but the field guys who actually trained with her always walked away stunned. The kid was absolute ice under pressure, methodical, quiet, and insanely patient. So when the deployment orders for this sandbox came across the desk, Ava didn't hesitate to raise her hand. She didn't want medals, and she didn't want revenge. She volunteered because the mission brief contained 4 words that made her heart stop: Christmas Day hostage extraction. She refused to let another squad lose a father or a teammate on Christmas. Not if she could help it. The memory of her dad's military funeral flashed through her mind as she crouched low in the freezing Afghan powder. The crisp, folded flag, the sharp cracks of the 3-volley salute, and the way the commanding officer had looked down at her with a mix of pity and total awe. "Your dad always swore you were the finest natural marksman he'd ever laid eyes on," the officer had told her. Go prove him right. Tonight, she intended to do exactly that. Up ahead, our SEAL squad pressed forward in a tight, staggered line, every man's weapon raised, each operator covering his designated piece of the sky. The heavy snow muffled everything, turning the mountain into a silent, white void where a threat could burst out from literally anywhere. Ava trailed 20 yards back, her boots sinking deep into the fresh drifts with every step. Through her high-powered optic, she watched the thermal signatures in the distance. The count just kept ticking up. 30 hostiles, now 40. This wasn't some skeleton crew guarding a lone prisoner. This was a full, heavily reinforced Taliban platoon waiting in the dark. "Commander," her voice came through the comms, quiet and steady. "The thermal signatures are showing a company-sized element down there. We're looking at least 60 fighters, with more moving inside the structures." My reply was short and blunt. "Copy that. Maintain radio silence unless you've got critical intel." Translation: "Let the grown-ups handle the shooting, kid." Ava swallowed her frustration. She'd run into this exact same attitude during her field exercises. Seasoned operators who couldn't wrap their heads over the fact that life-saving intelligence could come from a girl who looked like she should be stressing over prom. The squad finally reached the edge of the first structure, a half-collapsed concrete garage littered with the rusted remains of old trucks. Chen and Rodriguez split off to clear the interior while the rest of us pulled tight security outside. The building was completely clear, but our tactical advantage was evaporating by the second. "Boss, we need to rethink this push," Lieutenant Patterson whispered over the net. "If they're packed in this tight, they know damn well we're in the area." I stared down at my digital display, running through our options. If we pulled back and called in an airstrip, it would take hours to get birds on station, and Harmon might not have hours left. But if we pushed ahead, we were risking a blind walk straight into a prepared trap. The math was ugly. Ava spotted the danger before any of us did. Roughly 800 yards up the slope, almost completely swallowed by the heavy snow, a dark figure shifted behind a low stone wall. The posture was unmistakable to anyone who knew weapons. It was a fighter adjusting his stance to shoulder something heavy, not a rifle, something much worse. "RPG gunner, Northern Ridgeline," Ava barked over the radio, completely abandoning the silence protocol. 800 yards, 10 degrees right of the main target building. "I've got nothing on my glass," Jackson shot back, squinting through his scope. "Trust me," Ava snapped. "He's leveling the tube right now." I hesitated for a fraction of a second. The kid could be jumping at shadows. The weather was complete garbage, and visibility was dropping fast. But there was a hard, chilling certainty in her voice that I couldn't ignore. "All elements hit the dirt and find hard cover," I yelled. My guys scattered. 3 seconds later, a rocket-propelled grenade roared through the driving snow, slamming directly into the rusted truck chassis we'd been using for cover just moments before. The explosion was deafening, showering the entire courtyard in blinding sparks and singing shrapnel. "Contact north," Chen screamed over the din. A second rocket streaked through the whiteout, followed immediately by a third. The ambush was officially sprung, and it was devastating. The heavy rockets pinned us flat against a crumbling stone wall, unable to move forward or fall back without walking right into a hail of gunfire from the high ground. "We've got to take out those launchers," I roared over the deafening noise. "Jackson Rodriguez, pour some lead on that ridge." The two operators opened up with their rifles, but the distance was just too great for the standard carbines. The thick wall of falling snow swallowed their tracer rounds whole. Right then, Ava made her move. Without asking for permission, she dropped low and crawled away from the main group, dragging herself toward a thick patch of pine trees about 30 yards to the west. Her dad's voice echoed clearly in her head. "Sometimes the right call is the exact thing that'll get you court-martialed, but you'll be alive to face the lawyers." The freezing slush soaked right through her winter jacket as she dragged her body forward, the heavy TAC-338 secured tightly to her shoulder harness. 30 yards became 40. The dark silhouettes of the pine trees loomed ahead, their branches heavy with fresh snow. She slid between two thick trunks, dropping into a natural dip in the earth that gave her solid cover and a straight shot at the ridge. It wasn't a perfect nest. Her right side was completely exposed, but it gave her the exact angle she needed. Ava kicked out the rifle's bipod and settled into a prone shooting position. Looking through her high-powered optic, she locked onto the first target, an RPG gunner poking out from behind a pile of stacked stones, getting ready to launch another rocket down our throats. Distance, 823 yards. Wind, blowing out of the northwest at 12 miles per hour, gusting erratically. Temperature, 4 below zero. She had to factor in air density, the rotation of the Earth at this specific latitude, and the fact that her cold barrel would jump slightly with the first shot. The math clicked into place in her mind within a heartbeat, pure muscle memory and countless hours of training taking over. She twisted the turrets on her scope, adjusting for the bullet's drop and the crosswind. Take a breath in, let it out, find the quiet space between heartbeats. Her fingers slowly took up the slack on the trigger. The heavy rifle slammed hard against her shoulder. The custom suppressor cut the roar down to a sharp metallic crack that was immediately lost to the howling wind. Through the glass, she watched the gunner drop instantly into the snow. "First launcher neutralized," she reported over the radio, her voice completely steady as she shifted to the next target. The second gunner was already scrambling to grab the dropped weapon. Ava tracked him smoothly, holding her aim just half a body width ahead of his stride. Her second shot caught him square in the chest, sending him tumbling backward down the slope. Second target down, shifting to number 3. The last gunner proved trickier. Realizing his buddies were being picked off by a sniper, he stayed flat behind the heavy rocks. Ava could only see the edge of his elbow and a tiny sliver of his knee. There wasn't enough meat showing for a clean kill. She waited, breathing slowly, her eye glued to the scope. 10 seconds ticked away, then 20. The man finally shifted, trying to get a better angle to fire down at my pinned-out squad. As he moved, his head rose above the stone barrier for a split second. Ava squeezed the trigger. The bullet hit him clean through the eye. "All rocket positions are clear," she announced over the net. The radio went dead silent for 3 whole seconds. Then my voice broke the static, thick with disbelief. "Sierra 7, confirm you just cleared 3 targets at 800 yards in the middle of a whiteout." "Confirmed, sir. Your approach is wide open." Another brief pause. "Incredible shooting, kid. Hold your nest and keep our backs covered." Ava let out a tiny, quiet smile. Maybe they were finally starting to see what she could do. With the high ground threat gone, we pushed forward again, moving with a lot more confidence. But Ava's gut was screaming at her that something was wrong. The Taliban had shown their hand way too early in the game. Experienced fighters didn't blow an ambush like that unless they had a secondary trap ready to spring. She swept her glass across the buildings, searching for whatever we were missing. The main structure sat right in the center, its windows dark and completely lifeless. Too lifeless. The heavy thermal clusters she'd spotted from the air had scattered, moving out toward our flanks. They weren't running away. They were hurting us. "Commander, I strongly suggest you hold the line," she transmitted. "The enemy is shifting to trap you from the sides." "Copy that," I replied, but we kept moving. We were already in the belly of the beast, too close to the target building to turn back now. Ava swung her crosshairs over to the eastern flank, where dark shapes were moving quickly between the outbuildings. Through the driving snow, she spotted fighters clad in heavy winter camouflage, carrying assault rifles and heavy machine guns. They were setting up a classic crossfire. The squad hit the outer perimeter wall of the main compound. Chen quickly slapped a breaching charge onto the heavy iron gate. 3, 2, 1. The blast blew the gate clean off its hinges, and my guys poured into the courtyard. Instantly, the night erupted in blinding muzzle flashes from 3 different sides. The enemy had waited until we were completely boxed in before opening up from their hidden positions. "Taking fire from the left and right. We've got shooters on the 2nd floor." The radio channel dissolved into controlled chaos as the squad returned fire, trying to manage multiple threats at once. I had been right to worry. This wasn't a standard guard detail. It was a beautifully orchestrated trap, and we had walked right into the center of it. Ava went straight to work. Her scope found a machine gunner perched on a flat roof, spraying heavy fire across the open courtyard where my guys were pinned down. Distance, 645 yards. She compensated for the shorter range, dialed back the windage, and sent a round downrange. The gunner collapsed instantly over his weapon. Another fighter burst through a side door, raising an RPG tube toward our position. Ava's next shot caught him right in the gut before he could level the weapon, causing the rocket to detonate harmlessly against the stone wall behind him. "Sniper in the northeast tower," Jackson yelled over the comms. "Martinez is hit." Ava whipped her scope toward the tower, a crumbling old concrete minaret rising above the main house. She spotted the sharp flash of his muzzle and the silhouette of the shooter as he tracked another target. This guy wasn't a regular militia fighter. The slow, deliberate pace of his fire proved he was a trained professional. She fired and missed. The heavy wind shifted violently at the last millisecond, driving the bullet 6 inches to the left of his head. Sensing the danger, the enemy sniper immediately dropped out of sight. For a long, agonizing minute, neither of them moved. Then, Ava caught a tiny, unmistakable glint of light through the snow. He was hunting for her. She reached into her vest pocket and pulled out her dad's old hand mirror. Holding it out at arm's length, she angled the glass to catch the faint moonlight. throwing a quick, bright flash about 50 feet to her right. The enemy sniper bit on the trick. His muzzle flashed in the dark as he fired a heavy round at the fake target. But Ava was already locking onto the flash, her finger already halfway through the trigger pull. The shot was dead on, striking him dead center in the chest. He tumbled backward over the edge of the tower. "Tower sniper is gone," she reported. "How's Martinez?" "Just a scratch on his arm," Rodriguez shot back. "He's still in the fight thanks to you." Part 4. The firefight raged on for another 10 grueling minutes, but with Ava holding the high ground and dropping anything that moved, the momentum completely shifted. Every single time a Taliban fighter tried to flank my squad, a heavy bullet from the tree line stopped them cold. Every time they tried to set up another heavy machine gun to pin us down, Ava neutralized the threat before they could chamber a round. By the time the air went quiet, she had squeezed off 14 rounds, 12 confirmed hits. My voice crackled over her radio, stripped of the earlier condescension and filled with a raw, earned respect. "Sierra 7, exceptional work down there. We're moving inside the primary structure to secure the package. Keep your eyes peeled and call out any movement." "Copy that, boss. I've got your back." As we kicked in the heavy doors of the main building, Ava tracked our movements through her glass, serving as our guardian angel in the dark. Just an hour and a half ago, my guys were making jokes about her age. Now, every single one of our lives rested entirely on her ability to keep that crosshair steady. She wasn't about to let us down. We moved through the interior structure room by room, clearing corners with the smooth, practiced efficiency of a veteran team. But out in the trees, Ava's attention was suddenly pulled away from the main house. Through her optic, she caught a tiny, deliberate motion way out on the far northwestern ridge. Someone else was setting up a sniper nest. This shooter was completely different from the militia guys we'd been dealing with. The way he took his time, choosing a perfectly masked position behind a heavy outcrop of rocks, screamed professional military training. "Commander, we've got a major problem," she transmitted, her voice dropping an octave. "I'm looking at a probable counter-sniper setting up on the northwest ridge. Estimated range is 1,100 yards. "Can you take him off the board?" I asked, our movement pausing inside the structure. "I'm working on it." The distant figure was barely a shadow through the thick, swirling curtain of snow. Ava could only make out the vaguest, dark outline of a human form lying prone behind the rocks. Then, she saw it. A long, heavy barrel extending forward from the stone. It was a serious, high-caliber rifle. Judging by the sheer length of the barrel, she knew exactly what she was looking at. She punched the numbers into her ballistic computer. 1,100 yards. In perfect weather on a flat range, her TAC-338 could reach out that far with total reliability. But tonight was a nightmare. The wind was gusting sideways in unpredictable bursts. The heavy snow reduced her visibility to almost nothing, and she was trading lead with a guy who knew every single trick in the book. Through the green glow of her scope, she saw the enemy barrel swivel slowly down the mountain, locking onto the exit route my team would have to take. He was getting ready to ambush us the moment we stepped outside with the diplomat. Ava didn't wait. She fired first, aiming high above his position to fight the extreme drop of the bullet over that distance. The heavy round slammed into the dirt 30 feet short of the target, kicking up a spray of frozen gravel. Sensing the near miss, the enemy sniper instantly melted back into the rocks, realizing he was dealing with a real counter-sniper. For the next few minutes, the mountain became a deadly, silent chess match. Neither shooter could get the upper hand. The distance was simply too vast, and the blizzard made every calculation a guessing game. Ava would squeeze off a round, forcing him to scramble for cover. A second later, a heavy bullet would snap past her own head, showering her nest in pine needles and snow. It was a terrifying dance between two professionals pushing their gear and their bodies to the absolute limit. Suddenly, the enemy sniper shifted tactics. He crawled to a completely new ledge that gave him a perfect, unobstructed angle right down into the courtyard where we were getting ready to exit. He was intentionally ignoring Ava now, betting he could pick us off before she could dial in his new position. She couldn't let that happen. Her dad's voice echoed in her mind from an old training session in the woods of North Carolina. When the manual fails you, kiddo, you start improvising. A sniper isn't just a trigger puller. A sniper is a problem solver. She reached down and pulled out the old hand mirror once more, studying the layout of the slope. The moon was completely choked out by storm clouds now, but the vast sheets of white snow on the ground acted as a natural reflector, creating just enough ambient light. She carefully angled the glass, catching that faint glow and throwing a tiny, rhythmic pulse of light toward a thick snowdrift 20 feet to her left. The enemy shooter fell for it. His rifle barrel swung instantly toward the fake flash, but Ava wasn't aiming at his current position anymore. She had already moved her crosshairs to the exact spot where his head would have to be when he turned to engage the glare. She held her breath, feeling the frozen air bite at her cheeks. The screaming wind suddenly died down for a fraction of a second, creating a tiny, perfect window of calm air. She squeezed the trigger during that exact silence, trusting her math, trusting her hands, and trusting her dad's memory. She watched the round leap into the dark. The bullet traveled through the freezing air for nearly 3 agonizing seconds before making contact. Through her glass, Ava watched the enemy sniper jerk violently backward as the heavy round hit home. His rifle slipped from his lifeless hands and tumbled down the rocks. "Target neutralized," she whispered into her mic. The radio channel practically exploded. "Sierra 7, tell me that was you throwing lead at 1,100 yards? It was Jackson. The raw mockery from the helicopter completely vanished from his voice. "Confirmed," Ava replied flatly. "Holy Christ," someone muttered in the background. "That's a world-class competition shot in the middle of a literal blizzard." I cut through the chatter immediately. "Cut the noise, boys. We've got Harmon. He's banged up but breathing. We are moving to the extraction point now." Ava swept her scope back down to the valley, checking our exit path. The immediate area around the house was clear, but her heart sank as she looked further down the mountain trail. Bright orange heat signatures were blooming in the valley below. Heavy reinforcements were scrambling up the ridge. The Taliban weren't throwing in the towel just yet. "Boss, you've got about 15 minutes before a massive force cuts off your escape," she warned. "I'm tracking 30 to 40 fresh hostiles moving fast from the southern trail." "Understood. We are expediting the movement. Get yourself to the bird." Through her optic, Ava watched our squad spill out of the concrete house, keeping Richard Harmon shielded in the center of the formation. The diplomat looked terrible. His face was heavily bruised. He was limping badly, but he was moving under his own power. The team moved at a dead sprint toward the designated landing zone, a wide clearing about 200 yards east where the Chinook could touch down. That's when the Taliban commander made his final, desperate play. He burst out from a hidden underground bunker right at the edge of the perimeter wall, flanked by 2 heavily armed bodyguards. But it wasn't the warlord that made Ava freeze. It was the person he was dragging by the arm. He was pulling a terrified Afghan girl, no older than 10, using her body as a living shield. "Target commander is out in the open, but he's got a kid," Chen shouted, his rifle raised but useless. The warlord buried himself entirely behind the little girl, dragging her backward toward the thick cover of the tree line, while his 2 guards poured heavy, suppressing fire down on our position, keeping us completely pinned in the deep snow. "I can't get a clean look," Jackson yelled over the radio. "The kid is completely blocking his chest." My voice was grim as I stared at the retreating figures. "We cannot let him take her into the mountains." "Sierra 7, do you have an angle from up there?" Ava locked her crosshairs onto the moving pair. The commander was smart. He kept the little girl perfectly aligned between his body and my squad, but the deep snow was making it hard for him to walk. To keep his balance on the slick slope, he had to occasionally swing the girl out to his side for a split second to avoid tripping. The window to shoot would be microscopic, maybe half a second at best, and the bullet would have to cut through a thick web of pine branches that could easily send the round wild. "I might have a window," Ava radioed back, her breath catching in her throat. "But it's incredibly high risk. If the bullet deflects off a branch, I hit the kid. What are the odds, Sierra 7? I demanded. Ava thought about her dad. She thought about those 11 guys he had saved by taking a blind shot when the world was crashing down around him. She thought about the little scratched mirror sitting against her chest. 60%, she said honestly. The radio went dead. 60% meant there was a 40% chance she would kill an innocent child right in front of us. Those weren't operational odds anyone could live with. Hold your fire, Sierra 7, I ordered. We'll pursue on foot. But Ava didn't move her eye from the glass. The warlord was just yards away from a deep ravine that would swallow him whole. If he reached that trench, we would lose him forever in the blizzard. The little girl would vanish into the dark, swallowed by the exact same nightmare that had already taken so many lives in these mountains. Then, Ava spotted a tiny detail that changed the entire equation. She looked closely at the commander's hand where it clamped down on the girl's small shoulder. He wasn't just holding onto her jacket. His thumb and forefinger were dug deep into the precise nerve cluster where the neck meets the shoulder. A professional pain compliance hold meant to paralyze an individual with pure agony so they can't fight back. If he had just been dragging her in a panic, he would have grabbed her arm or her collar. That specific grip meant he knew exactly how the human body responded to pain. And that meant Ava had a clear target that didn't involve the girl's torso at all. "Commander, I'm taking the shot," Ava announced. "Negative, Sierra 7, stand down." But Ava's finger was already completing the squeeze. Part 5. The heavy round covered the 890 yards through the swirling blizzard, cutting clean through the thick pine branches and the biting air that tried to force it off target. It slammed precisely where Ava had focused her crosshairs. The Taliban commander's right wrist, right where his fingers were dug into the girl's shoulder. The bullet shattered the bone instantly. His hand opened up in an involuntary spasm, and the little girl immediately dropped into a low roll, slipping away into the powder just like Ava had gambled she would. The two bodyguards froze for a split second, completely blindsided by the sudden shift. "Shifting to secondary targets," Ava reported, her voice like ice as she tracked the first guard. 2 rapid pulls of the trigger sent 2 more rounds down the mountain. Both targets dropped where they stood. The warlord was flat on his knees in the red snow, clutching his ruined arm and screaming into the night. Rodriguez blurred into the frame a second later, tackling him into the drifts and binding his good arm with heavy zip ties. Chen scooped up the little girl, swaddling her inside his massive winter jacket before hauling her toward the clearing. My voice broke through her headset, tight and ragged with adrenaline. "Sierra 7, that was either the single greatest piece of marksmanship I've ever witnessed, or you are the luckiest person on God's green earth. I honestly don't know which one it is." "Neither one, boss," Ava replied softly. "It was just the shot that needed to be taken." 20 minutes later, the massive Chinook dropped out of the whiteout, its huge rotors turning the mountain clearing into a blinding vortex of flying snow. The squad scrambled up the ramp, hauling the diplomat, the little girl, our wounded teammate Martinez, and the bleeding warlord into the belly of the helicopter. Before boarding, I walked past the line and found Ava in the tree line, her frozen fingers already systematically breaking down her rifle for transport. "That wrist shot," I said, looking down at her. "How did you know the girl would drop?" "I didn't know for certain," she admitted, not looking up from her weapon. "But I saw his grip. He was using a pain compliance hold. When a high-caliber round breaks the bone like that, the nervous system completely short-circuits. The muscles have to release. I bet everything that her natural instinct would be to pull away from the source of the pain." "And if your math had been off by 2 inches? I don't miss." I stared at her in the dim cabin light. "Your file says you're 15. It forgot to mention you're one of the most lethal snipers I've ever shared a battlefield with." Ava snapped the receiver back into place. "The file also leaves out the part where my dad died on an operation exactly like this one. Last Christmas, he was holding the high ground for a team of SEALs down in Yemen." The pieces finally clicked together in my head. Master Sergeant David Reyes. The man who had stayed in his nest and traded his life so 11 of our brothers could fly home. He saved 11 guys that morning, I said quietly. He did, Ava whispered, looking up at me. And I was damn sure not going to let you guys become the 12th casualty he couldn't stop. The rest of the team had gone quiet, crowding around the back of the bay to listen. Jackson stepped forward, reaching down to pull the Velcro unit patch right off his right shoulder, the skull and trident of SEAL Team 7. Kid, regulations say I'll get chewed out for handing you this, he said, holding it out. But unofficially, you earned the right to wear it tonight. 12 confirmed tags, 0 friendly losses. Most guys spend an entire career trying to hit a ratio like that. He pressed the heavy fabric into her palm. One by one, the rest of the operators lined up, each offering a rough squeeze of her hand, a nod of absolute respect, or a quiet word of thanks. For the first time since we'd pulled pitch from Virginia, something broke behind Ava's stoic expression. The high wall she'd built up around her grief, her isolation, and her anger simply cracked. Heavy tears started carving tracks down her frozen cheeks. My dad always told me that real snipers don't cry, she whispered, wiping her face with a gloved hand. I reached out and patted her shoulder. Your old man was wrong about that one, kid. The great ones always do. It's the only thing that reminds you that every single pull of the trigger has a cost. It means you remember the weight of the lives you save and the ones you take. Chen walked over from the medic station, holding the little Afghan girl who was now warm and wrapped in blankets. She was still trembling, but the medic had cleared her of any real injuries. She keeps asking who the person was that stopped the bad man, Chen said, looking at Ava. I told her she was being watched over by an angel in the snow. The little girl locked her eyes onto Ava and gave her a tiny, fragile smile through everything she'd suffered. Ava smiled back, a strange, heavy mixture of bone-deep exhaustion, sorrow, and sudden purpose washing over her. She wondered if this was exactly how her dad had felt in those final minutes in Yemen, knowing the cost, but knowing his people were safe. As the helicopter banked hard away from the mountain range, Rodriguez slid into the seat next to her. So, what's the play now, Sierra 7? You fly back to Langley, go back to 10th grade, and pretend you spent your winter break doing normal kid stuff. I honestly don't know, Ava said, looking out the dark porthole. The agency doesn't exactly give me a weekly schedule. Well, listen to me, Rodriguez said, leaning in. The second you hit 18, if you ever want a permanent locker with our unit, the door is wide open. We could always use a shooter with your eye. Hell, we need someone with your heart. The Chinook roared through the pre-dawn sky, leaving the valley far behind. Below us, the heavy sheets of falling snow were already burying our tracks, erasing the bloodstains and the brass casings from the courtyard. By sunrise, the mountain would look completely untouched, as if the storm had simply washed the world clean. But Ava knew she'd never forget. She would carry every single calculation, every single trigger pull, and every life tied to this mountain for the rest of her days. As we flew through the dark hours of Christmas morning, making our way back to the airfield, Ava reached into her kit and pulled out her dad's old mirror. The scratched, nicked glass caught her reflection, showing a face that looked years older than the girl who had boarded the helicopter 12 hours earlier. I kept them safe, Dad, she whispered into the empty space of the cabin. Just like you taught me. Around her, the guys were completely silent, each man buried deep in his own head. That's just what combat does to you. It forces you inward, making you look at exactly who you are and what you had to do to survive. But there was a bond in that quiet, too. A deep understanding that didn't need a single word to back it up. Jackson finally broke the silence, leaning across the aisle with a curious look. Sierra 7, what was your furthest connection tonight? 1,134 yards, Ava answered without hesitating. The counter-sniper tucked up on the northwest ridge. Had to shoot through a blizzard with side gusts hitting 30 clicks an hour. He shook his head, a low whistle escaping his teeth. That shouldn't even be possible. My dad used to say that impossible is just a word people use for things that haven't been pulled off yet. I looked over at her from across the bay, taking in the kid's composure. Your old man didn't just teach you how to shoot, Ava. He gave you something a hell of a lot more valuable. He gave you judgment. You knew exactly when to let the round fly and when to hold your breath. That's the line between a good trigger puller and a great sniper. I almost took out that little girl, Ava said, her voice dropping so low it was nearly swallowed by the roar of the rotors. If the wind had kicked left, if my math had been off by even an inch. But it wasn't, I interrupted firmly. You made a massive call under the worst pressure imaginable. That takes real guts. Or a little bit of losing your mind, Jackson added, a tiny, tired grin breaking across his face. Probably a healthy dose of both. The thick layer of tension in the cabin finally snapped, and a wave of exhausted laughter rippled through my squad. Even Ava let out a small smile, though I could see her hands were still trembling slightly as the final drops of adrenaline drained out of her system. The first hints of dawn were breaking over Bagram Airfield when our wheels finally touched down. The Christmas morning sky was completely clear, a sharp, beautiful contrast to the nightmare of a storm we'd left behind in the peaks. The ground crews were already sprinting out to meet the bird, with medics trailing right behind them to handle our wounded. As we walked down the ramp, a guy in sharp civilian clothes stepped out from the hangar. Ava spotted him instantly. Thomas Crawford, her agency handler from Langley. "Merry Christmas," he said, his tone dry as bone. "I hear you managed to make quite a stir out there." "The package was secured successfully," Ava replied, falling right back into the formal, detached language she'd been trained to use. Crawford looked past her toward my squad, who were already getting grouped up by the command staff for a debrief. "Blake already sent over the preliminary field notes. 12 confirmed tags. 1 high-value asset pulled out alive, 1 hostile commander in zip ties, and 0 friendly losses. The top brass is absolutely thrilled." "What happens to me now?" Crawford looked down at her, his expression softening just a fraction. "Now? You go home, back to Virginia. You get to go back to being a normal 15-year-old kid for a while." "I'm not a kid anymore," Ava said flatly. "No," Crawford agreed quietly. "You're right, you aren't. But you still deserve the chance to pretend, at least for a little while longer. Don't worry, the agency will still be there whenever you're ready to punch back in." I walked over right as Crawford was turning to leave, having just handed off my initial paperwork to the brass. "Mr. Crawford, I need a minute of your time. We need to talk about Sierra 7's future deployment schedule with our unit." "She's 15, Commander," Crawford countered, his voice dripping with caution. "I've got eyes. I know how old she is," I shot back, digging my heels in. "But age completely aside, she is hands down one of the most naturally gifted marksmen I have crossed paths with in 20 years of special operations. Her gut is flawless, her mechanics are perfect, and her head under fire is steadier than operators who have been doing this since before she was born." Crawford turned his gaze back to Ava. "Is this really what you want? You want to keep walking down this road?" Ava thought about her dad's final stand. She thought about those 11 guys who were going home to their wives and kids because he didn't give up his nest. She thought about the little girl, Zara, who was wrapped in a blanket inside the hangar, and she felt the heavy fabric of the SEAL Team 7 patch tucked safely inside her pocket. "My dad always used to tell me that having talent without a purpose is just wasted potential," she said, looking Crawford dead in the eye. "He gave me the talent. Tonight, I think I finally found the purpose." "That's a hell of a poetic line, but it's not exactly a yes or no," Crawford observed. "Yes, it is," I stepped in, clapping a hand on Ava's shoulder. "She's telling you she's in, and I'm telling you that the special operations community would be absolutely honored to have her on the line." Crawford let out a long, heavy sigh, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "You understand the kind of red tape we're talking about here, Commander. The legal hurdles, the ethical nightmare, the simple fact that she is supposed to be sitting in a sophomore homeroom next week. What I understand is that 11 of my guys are breathing air today because she didn't blink," I said, my voice hardening. "I understand that without her, we'd be unloading heavy silver boxes onto the tarmac right now instead of counting our blessings. Age doesn't mean a damn thing out in the snow. Performance does. Crawford looked at the two of us for a long moment before nodding. I'll have to run the numbers with Langley. For now, Ava, you're on a bird back to the States. We'll sort out the fine print later. The office inside the Pentagon was surprisingly small. I had spent years imagining some grand, sweeping war room, but the space where Crawford and I sat was just another bland government office. It had the same flickering fluorescent lights, a dented metal desk, and a solitary American flag standing in the corner. Across from us sat two generals and a colonel, their eyes glued to a thick, classified file with my name stamped across the cover. "This is completely unprecedented," General Morrison said, tossing the file onto the desk. "We do not deploy 15-year-olds into active combat zones, period." "We just did," Crawford countered calmly, leaning back in his chair. "And the results speak for themselves." "The results are a legal minefield," the colonel chimed in. "If the press gets wind of this, the public backlash will destroy us." "Then we make sure it stays dark," I said, stepping into the room. I had asked for a seat at this table specifically to back Ava up. "Sierra 7 remains a ghost asset," I continued. "Her identity stays buried under top-secret clearance, but we don't bench an operator with her level of capability just because the paperwork makes the bureaucrats uncomfortable." General Morrison turned his sharp gaze toward me. "Miss Reyes, do you actually grasp what we're talking about here? This means putting your life on the line over and over again. It means carrying the weight of taking human lives. We're asking you to make split-second calls that seasoned soldiers twice your age freeze up on." "Yes, sir," I said, keeping my voice level and matching his stare. "I understand completely." "And you still want to stay on the line?" I took a breath, choosing my words carefully. "My dad always taught me that everyone is born with a specific gift. Some people are meant to play music, some are brilliant at math, and others create art. I happen to be gifted at this, and I've already seen what happens when people with a gift choose to sit on their hands. Good people end up in the ground who should have walked away. Age didn't mean anything on that mountain, sir. Performance did." The room went entirely quiet. Finally, General Morrison let out a slow breath and slid the folder back toward his side of the desk. "I'm about to make a formal recommendation that will probably cost me my stars," the general said. "We establish a highly restricted, off-the-books category specifically for Sierra 7. Limited operational use, extreme oversight, and mandatory psychological check-ins every 60 days. If at any point the shrinks determine this is tearing her apart, we pull the plug instantly. Agreed?" The other officers exchanged a long look before nodding in unison. "Miss Reyes," Morrison said, leaning forward, "you will finish high school. You will maintain a completely normal cover identity as an average teenager. But when a crisis hits that requires your specific touch, places where a standard military unit can't tread, you will be ready to answer the call. Can you handle living a double life?" "I've been living it for 6 months already, sir." "Then welcome to the darkest corner of the Department of Defense," Morrison said. "Officially, you don't exist. Unofficially, you might just be the most valuable asset we have." Spring had finally arrived in Virginia. I sat near the back of my high school chemistry class, dutifully scribbling notes on molecular bonding, trying my best to focus on electron configurations while my mind kept drifting back to windage corrections and bullet trajectories. Suddenly, the phone in my pocket gave a short buzz. It was a text from an unlisted number, but I recognized the encryption code instantly. "Weather forecast looks clear. Planning a camping trip. You interested? B. Blake." It was another mission. I quickly typed back. "When and where? Meet your friend Thomas this evening. He'll have the map layout." I deleted the thread immediately. The routine's second nature by now. Around me, the room was filled with the loud chatter of my classmates arguing over prom dresses and college applications. Normal things for normal teenagers. But I wasn't normal anymore. Honestly, I don't think I ever had been. That evening, Crawford laid out the blueprint for the new operation inside a secure safe house. A militant group in Somalia had taken several American aid workers hostage in a deeply fortified camp. The terrain was brutal, and the rescue plan was deemed exceptionally high risk. SEAL Team 7 specifically requested you for the high ground, Crawford said, sliding a satellite image across the table. Blake says you're their lucky charm. When do we wheels up? I asked. Crawford hesitated, looking at me with a heavy expression. Tomorrow morning. But Ava, the psychologist's evaluation came back yesterday. She noted that you're managing the stress remarkably well, but she's deeply worried about the long-term toll. You're processing the kind of trauma that completely breaks grown men. I'm fine, I said automatically. Are you really? I looked down at the satellite map, letting the question hang in the air. Was I fine? I still woke up in a cold sweat dreaming about that split-second wrist shot on the mountain. I still saw the faces of the 12 men I had to eliminate on Christmas night. But then I pictured Zara, safe and warm in Kabul because I didn't miss. I thought about the guys from Team 7 who got to go home and hug their families on Christmas morning. And I thought about my father, who had shown me that standing between innocent people and absolute darkness was the highest honor a person could achieve. I might not be fine, I admitted softly, looking back up at him. But I'm doing something that actually matters. And to me, that's a hell of a lot better than just being fine. 3 years later, on the morning of my 18th birthday, an official courier delivered a sealed letter from the Department of Defense to my dorm room at Georgetown University. I sat on the edge of my bed and broke the wax seal. The message inside was brief and to the point. Your service to this nation has been nothing short of exemplary. Whenever you are ready, if you still choose a permanent place among us, the slot is yours. We would be profoundly honored to have you. It was signed by the commanding officers of SEAL Team 7, Delta Force, and the CIA's Special Activities Division. To my professors and classmates, I was just another driven international relations major maintaining a flawless 4.0 GPA. They had absolutely no clue that I had successfully executed 17 classified deployments over the last 3 years, or that the call sign Sierra 7 was whispered with legendary respect across the entire special operations community. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a small wooden box containing my 3 most prized possessions. My dad's scratched hand mirror, the heavy silver SEAL Team 7 challenge coin, and a glossy photograph sent to me from Kabul. It was a picture of a little girl named Zara, smiling broadly on her very first day of school. The letter sitting on my bed asked if I finally wanted a real place among them. I smiled to myself, realizing the truth. I had never really left. I picked up my secure phone and punched in a familiar number. It rang twice before a gravelly voice answered. "Sir, this is Sierra 7, I said, looking out the window at the morning sun. "I'm ready for full-time duty." On the other end of the line, I could practically hear the broad grin split across Blake's face. "Welcome home, operator," he replied. "We've been waiting for you." The youngest sniper in American history had just officially punched her card.